I stood there in my black dress, the fabric heavy against my skin, watching them lower my husband's casket into the ground. 42 years of marriage, ending in 6 feet of Pennsylvania earth. The September sun felt wrong, too bright, too warm for a day like this. I clutched my daughter Emma's arm, seeking comfort, while my son Jake stood on my other side, stone-faced and silent. Then I heard it. Emma leaned across me, her breath tickling my ear as she whispered to her brother. Her voice was low, conspiratorial, but not low enough. "Once we sell her house, we split it 50/50ths. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. I'm Linda Morrison, and this is the story of how my children tried to plan my financial funeral while I was still standing at their father's. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to know, where are you watching from? Drop your state or country in the comments. I want to know where my story is reaching. You need to understand something about my life with Richard. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. He worked as an electrical engineer for 34 years at the same firm in Pittsburgh. I taught elementary school for 26 years before retiring. We saved. We planned. We bought our house in Sewickley in 1989 for $142,000. That same house, worth $680,000 now. Richard and I never discussed leaving everything to the kids. It was understood, implied in 1,000 conversations over morning coffee and late-night financial reviews. We'd given them everything. Paid for Emma's wedding, the whole $45,000 production, helped Jake with his down payment when he couldn't qualify for the full mortgage, sent them both through college debt-free while other kids graduated owing 6 figures. But as I stood there, Emma's words echoing in my ears, I realized something terrible. They weren't grieving. They were calculating. The reception afterward was held at my house. I watched them move through the rooms like appraisers, not mourners. Emma ran her hand along the dining room table Richard had restored by hand, the one he'd spent 3 months sanding and refinishing. I saw her eyes, not misty with memory, but bright with assessment. Jake stood in the sunroom, the one Richard and I had added in 2003, staring out at the garden. I thought maybe he was remembering his father teaching him to throw a baseball out there. Then I heard him on his phone. "Yeah, the real estate market's hot right now. Properties in this neighborhood are going fast. We're talking maybe 6 weeks to close, tops." My hands shook as I poured coffee I didn't want. Guests offered condolences I couldn't really hear. The whole afternoon passed in a blur of casserole dishes and sympathy cards, while my children prowled my home like vultures circling something, not quite dead yet. At 6 p.m., the last guest left. Emma hugged me, held me just a beat too long. "We're here for you, Mom. Whatever you need." Jake nodded. "We'll help you through this transition." Transition, not grief, not healing. Transition. They left together, and through the window I watched them talking in the driveway, animated, gesturing, planning. I sat down in Richard's chair. I still couldn't think of it as just mine, and I made a decision. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house felt enormous and empty without Richard snoring, without his habit of getting up at 2 a.m. for water. I lay there in our bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying Emma's whisper over and over. Once we sell her house. Not Mom's house. Not even the house. Her house. Like I was already a memory, a line item in an estate inventory. At 4 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to Richard's study. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His reading glasses on the desk, a legal pad with notes about refinancing options he'd been researching. I opened the filing cabinet where we kept our important documents. Our will was straightforward. Everything to the surviving spouse, then upon both our deaths, split equally between Emma and Jake. Simple. Standard. That's what the lawyer had recommended 20 years ago when we'd first drawn it up. But as I read through it now, with fresh eyes and a broken heart, I saw the problem. Richard and I had assumed, God, how stupidly we'd assumed, that when one of us died, the other would be cared for by our children. Supported, loved. We'd never imagined this. I pulled out the property deed next. The house was in both our names, joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Now it was just mine, solely, completely mine, to do with as I wished. The sun came up while I sat there, surrounded by papers that represented a lifetime of careful planning. I thought about calling Emma, confronting her. I thought about pretending I'd never heard anything. I thought about a lot of things. Then I remembered something from 2 months ago. Richard's cancer diagnosis had come in July, stage 4 pancreatic, the kind that doesn't give you much time. Emma had come over that first terrible night, and I'd overheard her on the phone with someone. Yeah, it's bad. Few months, maybe. We need to start thinking about arrangements. At the time, I'd thought she meant funeral arrangements. Now I wondered if she'd meant financial ones. Jake had been different, but not better. He'd visited Richard in the hospital 3 times in those last awful weeks. 3 times in 60 days. Each visit lasted less than an hour. He'd stood by the bed, awkward and distant, checking his phone while his father, dying, mind you, tried to tell him stories about when Jake was little. But I remembered Jake pulling me aside during that last hospital visit, just 2 days before Richard passed. Mom, have you thought about downsizing? This is a lot of house for one person. We could help you find a nice condo. A nice condo. Translation. Something cheaper, leaving more inheritance for them. I made coffee as the morning light filled the kitchen. My hands were steadier now. I had a clarity I hadn't felt since before Richard got sick, when I'd been too consumed with caregiving and grief to see what was happening right in front of me. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found him. Martin Weber, our estate attorney. The one who'd drawn up our will 2 decades ago. I typed out a message. Martin, it's Linda Morrison. I need to see you this week. It's urgent. We need to discuss changing my estate plan. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. Martin's office was in downtown Pittsburgh, in one of those old buildings with marble floors and brass fixtures that made you feel like serious business got done there. I'd gotten dressed carefully that morning, not in morning black, but in a navy blazer and slacks. I needed to feel strong, not bereaved. Linda, I'm so sorry about Richard, Martin said, standing as his secretary showed me in. He was 73, silver-haired, with kind eyes that had seen too many family disputes. I wanted to come to the service, but I was in Philadelphia with my daughter. It's fine, Martin. Thank you. I sat down, placed my purse carefully on the side table. I need to make some changes. Immediately. He settled back into his chair, pulling out a legal pad. Of course. What are we looking at? Updating beneficiaries, perhaps adding some charitable bequests? I took a breath. This was it. The moment where I either told the truth or kept up the pretense that my children were the loving, devoted people I'd raised them to be. I want to transfer the house out of my estate, completely, before I die. Martin's pen stopped moving. That's a significant decision. Can I ask what's prompting this? So I told him. Everything, the whisper at the funeral, the phone call in the sunroom, the years of taking and never giving back. By the time I finished, my voice was shaking, but I wasn't crying. I was past tears. Martin was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, Linda, I've been practicing estate law for 46 years. You know what the saddest part of my job is? It's not drafting wills for dying people. It's watching what happens afterward when the kids show their true colors. Can you help me? I asked. Yes, but we need to think carefully about this. If you deed the house to charity now, you can't undo it. You'll still have the right to live there for your lifetime. We'll structure it as a retained life estate, but once you're gone, the property goes to whatever organization you choose. Your children get nothing from the house. That's exactly what I want. He leaned forward. Have you considered the tax implications? The emotional fallout? Linda, your children are going to fight this. Let them fight. My voice was stronger now. Richard and I gave them everything. College educations, weddings, down payments. I calculated it last night. We've given them over $400,000 combined over the years. And you know what Emma said to me last Christmas? She complained that we gave Jake $5,000 more than we gave her because of his down payment. She kept a tally, Martin, like we were a bank, not her parents. Martin nodded slowly. All right, let's talk about charities. Have you thought about where you want the property to go? I had. I'd spent the past 3 sleepless nights thinking about nothing else. The Sewickley Valley Hospital. Richard spent his last days there. The nurses were better to him than his own children. There's a hospice wing they're trying to fund. I want my house to go to that. That's beautiful, Linda. It's justice, I corrected. There's a difference. The legal process took 11 days. 11 days of paperwork, notaries, title searches, and property appraisals. Martin moved fast, which I appreciated. At 74 years old, I knew better than anyone that time was a luxury, not a guarantee. Emma called twice during those 11 days. The first time, she wanted to talk about Dad's things. His tools, his watch collection, the boat he'd kept at the marina. I told her I wasn't ready. The second time, she mentioned exploring options for the house. It's too soon, Emma, I said. Mom, I'm just trying to help. This place is so big, and you're all alone now. Jake and I think maybe a condo would be... I said it's too soon. I hung up before she could finish. What? Jake texted me a realtor's contact information. Just in case you want to get an appraisal. Market's really good right now, Mom. No pressure, just thinking ahead. Thinking ahead. As if I were already gone. On day 7, I met with the hospital foundation director, a sharp woman named Patricia Chen, who nearly cried when I explained what I wanted to do. Mrs. Morrison, this is one of the most generous donations we've received this year. The hospice wing will serve hundreds of families. Richard would have wanted it, I said. And it was true. He'd often talked about how death should have dignity, how those nurses had given him peace in those final days when the pain was unbearable. On day 11, I sat in Martin's office and signed my name 17 times. Linda Morrison, Linda Morrison, Linda Morrison. Each signature felt like freedom. This is now a legally binding life estate deed, Martin explained, sliding the final document across his desk. You retain all rights to live in, modify, or maintain the property until your death. You'll continue to pay property taxes and homeowners insurance. But upon your death, the property transfers automatically to Sewickley Valley Hospital Foundation for the specific purpose of funding their hospice wing. Your children cannot contest this. It's not in your will. It's not part of your estate. The property is already gone. What if they try to have me declared incompetent? I'd thought of that at 3 a.m. on night 9. They can try, but you've been examined by your physician. He tapped at the medical evaluation I'd gotten, confirming my mental competence. And you've executed this document with clear intent, legal counsel, and sound mind. Plus, there's the recording I made with your permission. He gestured to the video camera in the corner. You clearly state your wishes and reasons. It would be very difficult to overturn. I stood up, feeling lighter than I had in months. Thank you, Martin. Linda, one more thing. He walked me to the door. They're going to be angry. Very angry. Have you thought about what you'll say? I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to let them figure it out themselves. He smiled, a sad, knowing smile. That seems appropriate somehow. I drove home with the recorded deed in my purse. Tomorrow, Martin would file it with the county. By end of week, it would be public record, but Emma and Jake wouldn't think to check. Why would they? They were too busy planning my future without me. 3 weeks passed. Fall deepened into the kind of October Pennsylvania is famous for. Leaves turning copper and gold, air crisp enough to need a jacket in the mornings. I tended Richard's garden, pulling up the spent tomato plants, cutting back the roses for winter. Neighbors stopped by with casseroles and sympathy. I accepted both with grace. Emma and Jake backed off, which should have been a relief, but somehow felt more ominous, like sharks circling, waiting for the right moment. I knew what they were doing, giving me time to grieve before they swooped in with realtor recommendations and moving company estimates. I'd seen it happen to Betty Chambers down the street when her husband died. Her daughter had her in a retirement community within 6 months. The family home sold to developers who tore it down for a McMansion. Not me, not my home. I spent those weeks sorting through Richard's belongings, his clothes, which still smelled faintly of his cologne, his books, decades of mysteries and biographies, his workshop in the basement full of tools he'd collected over a lifetime. I kept what mattered, donated what didn't, and cried more than I wanted to admit. But I didn't call my children, and they didn't call me. The silence was telling. On a Thursday afternoon, I was having coffee with my neighbor, Sandra, when she said something that stopped me cold. "I saw Emma leaving Riverside Realty last week. Does she work there now?" My hands tightened around my mug. "No, she works in pharmaceutical sales." Sandra's expression shifted. That careful, uncomfortable look people get when they've just said something revealing. "Oh, well, maybe she was looking at properties for a friend." We both knew she wasn't. That evening, I did something I'm not proud of but don't regret. I called Emma's husband, Tom. We'd always had an easy relationship. He was a good man who'd gotten pulled into my daughter's orbit and never quite escaped. "Tom, can I ask you something?" I kept my voice casual. "Has Emma mentioned anything about real estate recently?" The pause was too long. "Linda, Look, she's been researching property values in Sewickley. She made me promise not to say anything because she didn't want to upset you." "What exactly is she researching?" Another pause. "She's been talking to realtors, getting market analyses. She thinks, and please don't be angry, she thinks you should sell the house and move somewhere smaller. She's worried about you being alone in that big place." Worried about me or worried about her inheritance? "Linda, thank you for being honest, Tom." I hung up before he could say anything else. I sat there in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd made thousands of family dinners, where Emma had done her homework at the table, where Jake had announced he'd gotten into Penn State. The evening light slanted through the windows Richard had installed himself, hitting the walls we'd painted together, illuminating the life we'd built. And I felt nothing. No more anger, no more hurt, just a cold, clear certainty that I'd done the right thing. If you're watching this, and you've ever felt taken for granted by your own family, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to get very interesting. They came on a Sunday. Both of them together, which was my first clue that they'd coordinated this. Emma arrived first, with Tom trailing behind, looking uncomfortable. Jake showed up 10 minutes later with his wife, Rebecca, who at least had the decency to look apologetic. "Mom, we need to talk," Emma said, settling into the living room like she owned it, which, I suppose, she thought she soon would. "About what?" I poured coffee, playing innocent. Jake cleared his throat. "We're worried about you. This house is too much for one person to maintain. Dad did all the yard work, handled the repairs, managed everything. It's November now. What are you going to do when the roof needs work? When the furnace acts up?" "I'll hire people. That's what money is for." "But it's expensive, Mom," Emma leaned forward, "and unnecessary. We've been looking at some really nice condos." "I'm not moving." The temperature in the room dropped. Emma and Jake exchanged a glance, the kind of look that said they'd anticipated this resistance and had a plan for it. "Mom, be reasonable." Emma's voice had an edge now. "You're 74 years old. This house has 3 floors, a big yard, endless maintenance. What happens if you fall? What if you can't manage the stairs?" "Then I'll install a stair lift, or I'll move into the first-floor guest room. There are options, Emma, that don't involve me selling my home." Jake tried a different approach. "Think about the financial side. The property value has increased significantly. If you sell now, you could take that equity, invest it, live comfortably in a maintenance-free community. I am comfortable. Here, in my home. Your home that's worth nearly $750,000. Emma's mask was slipping. Money that's just sitting there, tied up in real estate when it could be... "Could be what, Emma?" I set down my coffee cup carefully. "Could be in your bank account?" Silence. Tom suddenly became very interested in his shoes. Rebecca looked at Jake like she wanted to disappear. "That's not fair," Emma said, but her voice was tight. We're thinking about your well-being." "Really? Is that what you were thinking about at your father's funeral? When you whispered to Jake about selling my house and splitting the money 50/50ths?" Emma's face went white, then red. "You heard that. I was standing right there, in my black dress, burying my husband." Jake had the grace to look ashamed, but Emma recovered quickly. We were planning ahead, Mom. It's called being responsible. Dad had just died, and we knew you'd eventually need to make decisions about the house. I've made my decisions." I stood up. "This conversation is over." "Mom, don't be stubborn about this." Emma stood too, her voice rising. "We're trying to help you. The house is too much, and frankly, at your age, you need to start thinking practically about your assets." "My assets?" I laughed, a harsh sound that surprised even me. "You mean your inheritance?" "We have a right to know what our financial future looks like," Jake said quietly. "No," I said, "you don't. Not while I'm still alive." They left angry. Emma slammed the door hard enough to rattle the picture frames. Jake at least closed his quietly, but the disappointment in his face cut deeper than his sister's rage. I waited until their cars pulled away. Then I called Martin. "They came," I said. "It's time." "Are you sure?" he asked. "Once they know, there's no going back. The relationship is already gone, Martin. It died at Richard's funeral. I'm just making it official." He sighed. "All right, I'll prepare the letters. They can be mailed tomorrow, delivered by Wednesday." "Thank you." That night, I couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't grief keeping me awake. It was anticipation. I thought about what their faces would look like when they opened those letters. When they realized the house they'd been planning to sell, the inheritance they'd been counting on, was gone. Part of me, the mother part, the part that had nursed them through fevers and cheered at their graduations, felt guilty, but a stronger part, the part that had heard her daughter calculate her worth at her husband's funeral, felt nothing but grim satisfaction. The letters went out Monday morning. Martin had drafted them carefully, explaining in legal terms that the property at 428 Maple Avenue, Sewickley, Pennsylvania, had been transferred via life estate deed to Sewickley Valley Hospital Foundation, effective October 15th and recorded with the county on October 18th. I included my own note, handwritten. "You made it clear at your father's funeral that you viewed me as an obstacle to your inheritance rather than as your mother. I've removed the obstacle. The house you were planning to sell now belongs to charity. I will live here until I die. Then it will fund a hospice wing in your father's name. You're welcome to contest this, but I'm assured you'll lose." "Mom." Wednesday morning, my phone exploded. Emma called 6 times before I answered. "What the hell have you done?" "I made a decision about my property." "Your property?" "Mom, that house is our inheritance. Dad worked his whole life. For our family, not for your real estate portfolio." "You can't do this. We'll fight it." "Martin says you'll lose. The deed is recorded. I was evaluated as mentally competent. I had legal counsel. But please, Emma, waste your money on lawyers. Prove to me one more time that all you care about is my money." She was screaming now, something about betrayal and family, and how could I be so cruel? I hung up. Jake's response came via email, 3 paragraphs of cold, formal anger. He questioned my judgment, my mental state, and my fitness to make financial decisions. He suggested I was being manipulated, that I needed a psychological evaluation, that this was clearly a response to grief-induced confusion. Not once did he say, "I'm sorry you hurt us at Dad's funeral." Not once did he say, "I'm sorry we hurt you." Just wounded entitlement and accusations. I forwarded his email to Martin with a single line, "Save this, in case they do try to prove incompetence." His response came within minutes. "They won't. They know they can't win. This is just anger talking." He was right. The next 3 months were quiet in the way a house is quiet after a storm. Damage done, debris settling. Emma didn't call. Jake sent one more email through a lawyer, which Martin responded to with copies of the medical evaluation, the deed recording, and the video documentation of my stated intentions. After that, Silence. Thanksgiving came and went. I'd always hosted, 20-plus years of turkey and stuffing and pies baked from Richard's mother's recipes. This year, I had dinner with Sandra and her husband. It was pleasant, peaceful, and I didn't cry until I got home and saw the empty chairs where my children should have been. Christmas was worse. The house felt enormous with just me rattling around in it. I put up a small tree, more from habit than joy. On Christmas morning, my phone stayed silent. So, Emma and Jake sent cards, but they were the generic kind you buy in bulk from Target. No personal messages. No love, Emma and Tom, or thinking of you, Jake. Just their printed names on the bottom of Hallmark sentiments. I spent the holiday looking through old photo albums. Emma at 8, missing her front teeth. Jake at 12, holding up his first soccer trophy. Birthdays and vacations and ordinary Tuesdays that had seemed so unremarkable at the time, but now felt precious beyond measure. Had I been wrong? Should I have just given them the house? Preserved the relationship, let them think they'd gotten away with it? No. No, because there was no relationship left to preserve. They'd killed it themselves. In January, Patricia from the hospital foundation called. Mrs. Morrison, I wanted to give you an update. We've received preliminary approval for the hospice wing expansion. Your donation, the future donation, I should say, was the catalyst. Other donors have stepped up. We're going to break ground in the spring. That's wonderful, I said, and meant it. Would you like to see the plans? We'd love to name something in your husband's honor. Maybe the garden area or one of the family rooms. I went to the hospital the following week. The architectural plans were beautiful. A peaceful wing with private rooms, each with windows overlooking what would be a meditation garden. There would be space for families to stay, a kitchen where they could make comfort food, a children's area for grandkids visiting dying grandparents. This room, Patricia said, pointing to a corner space with 2 walls of windows. We'd like to call this the Richard Morrison Family Room, a place for families to gather, to eat together, to remember together. I nodded, not trusting my voice. You've given something that will outlast all of us, she continued. 30, 40, 50 years from now, families will find comfort here because of your generosity. That's when I knew, really knew, that I'd made the right choice. Emma's daughter, my granddaughter Sophie, would be 18 in 6 years. Maybe by then she'd be old enough to understand what her mother had done, what I'd had to do in response. Maybe she'd come find me, let me explain. Or maybe she'd never speak to me again, poisoned against me by her parents' version of events. Either way, the house that had held so much love, so many memories, would continue to serve families when I was gone, just not mine. In March, on what would have been Richard's 75th birthday, something unexpected happened. I was in the garden, planting the early bulbs, tulips and daffodils that would bloom when I couldn't. The spring air was cool, and my knees ached from kneeling, but there was something meditative about putting my hands in the dirt, about planning for beauty I might not see. A car pulled into the driveway, not one I recognized. A woman got out, mid-30s, professionally dressed, carrying a folder. She walked across the lawn with purpose, and for a moment I thought maybe Emma had sent a lawyer, despite Martin's assurances that the deed was airtight. Mrs. Morrison, I'm Jennifer Hale from KDKA-TV, the news station. My heart sank. Whatever my children told you. Your children? She looked confused. I'm here about the hospital donation. Patricia Chen suggested I talk to you. We're doing a series on transformative local philanthropy, and your contribution to the hospice wing is, she checked her notes, the largest single property donation Sewickley Valley Hospital has received in 15 years. Oh, I stood up, brushing dirt from my knees. I don't need recognition. That wasn't the point. I understand, but your story is remarkable. A widow donating her home to create a hospice wing in her late husband's name? That's news, Mrs. Morrison. That inspires other people to give back. I let her interview me, mostly because she was kind and because Patricia had asked. We sat on the back porch, and I talked about Richard, about his last days, about the nurses who'd treated him with such dignity when he was at his most vulnerable. I didn't mention my children, not once. The segment aired a week later, 4 minutes during the evening news. They used footage of the house, Richard's photo, renderings of the proposed hospice wing. They called me a local hero and a model of selfless giving. My phone rang before the segment even ended. "Did you do this to embarrass us?" Emma's voice was shaking. "Everyone we know just saw that news story. Do you know how this makes us look?" "I didn't do it to embarrass anyone. I did it because Patricia asked, and because maybe someone else watching will be inspired to donate to something meaningful. You made us look like terrible people, like ungrateful children who drove their mother to give away her house to strangers." "Emma," I said quietly, "you made yourselves look like terrible children when you whispered about selling my house at your father's funeral. I just stopped pretending otherwise. We were grieving. People say things when they're upset. You weren't upset. You were planning. There's a difference." Silence. Then, "I hope you're happy, living in that house all alone with no family, no one who cares about you." "I am alone," I agreed, "but I have Sandra next door, who brings me soup when I'm sick. I have Patricia at the foundation, who sends me updates and photos. I have Martin, who checks on me every week. I have the hospice nurses who remember Richard and ask how I'm doing. So no, Emma, I'm not lonely. I'm just done with people who only valued me for what I could give them." She hung up. Jake never called at all. It's been 14 months since Richard died. 14 months since I heard my daughter plot my financial erasure at my husband's grave. 14 months since I signed those papers in Martin's office. The hospice wing broke ground in April. I went to the ceremony, watched them dig the foundation, saw Patricia give a speech about compassion and community. She mentioned Richard by name, called him a man who'd lived with dignity and would now help others die with it too. Emma and Jake weren't there. I hadn't expected them to be. I've learned some things in these months alone. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I've managed the house just fine, hired a yard service, called plumbers and electricians when needed. I've learned that my marriage was stronger than I realized, because Richard's love still sustains me even though he's gone. And I've learned that sometimes the greatest gift you can give your children is letting them face the consequences of their choices. The house feels different now. Lighter somehow, even though it holds the same furniture, the same memories. Maybe it's because I know its future is secure. When I die, and I will someday, this place won't be divided and diminished, fought over and sold to strangers who'll tear out Richard's hand-restored woodwork and modernize away everything we built together. Instead, it will become something greater than itself. Families I'll never meet will find comfort within the walls this money builds. People will hold the hands of dying loved ones in rooms that exist because I said no to my children's greed. That matters more than Emma's approval, more than Jake's disappointment. Last week, I received a letter from Sophie, my granddaughter. She's 15 now, and she wrote to me in secret, using her friend's address so her mother wouldn't know. "Grandma," it said, "Mom tells her side of the story, but I looked up the news article about the hospital donation. I think what you did was brave. I hope someday I'm brave enough to do the right thing, even when it's hard. I love you. I'm sorry I can't visit, but maybe when I'm older. Love, Sophie." I cried when I read it. Good tears for the first time in months. There's no perfect ending to this story. My children haven't apologized. We don't have tearful reconciliations. Real life isn't a movie where everyone learns their lesson and comes together. But I have peace. I sleep through the nights now. I work in Richard's garden and talk to him like he can hear me. I have Sunday dinners with Sandra and her family. I've joined a book club. I'm learning to paint badly, but with joy. And when I sit on this porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where I've lived for 35 years, I don't feel bitter or alone. I feel free. My children made a choice at their father's funeral. They chose money over love, inheritance over integrity. And I made a choice too. I chose dignity. I chose purpose. I chose to let my life's work mean something beyond my own family's wealth. That's my story, that's my truth. And I don't regret a single signature on those papers. Not one.